US initial jobless claims rose to a two-month high at the end of January, suggesting cooling in the labour market. Claims rose by 9,000 to 224,000, surprising to the upside. It comes as US-based employers announced plans to cut over 82,000 jobs in January, more than double the December figure. Attention now turning to the non-farm payrolls number due out of the United States today, with the economy expected to have added 180,000 jobs in January, according to LSEG estimates. That would be down from the December figure, providing further signs of a slowing labour market. The unemployment rate is expected to tick slightly higher to 3.8%. This after private sector job report showed that payrolls increasing less than expected in January. I'm delighted to welcome back, we always are delighted to welcome to see Neela Richardson, Chief Economist at ADP. Neela, we always love seeing you. And one thing about you, which I remember from our first meeting, is Neela says, yeah, the payrolls are good, but my data's better. I haven't forgotten that. So ADP has a lot more data points than other measures out there as well, and a differentiation between the payrolls and what have you. Tell us what your surveys are showing about the labour market, because to the rest of us, it looks incredibly strong still, despite a little bit of a slowing down.
Right. So ADP pays about 20% of the U.S. workforce. So we actually get paycheck data directly. It's not a survey, and that's why I really love this data set. It's very rich, it's very fine-grained, it's very comprehensive across the country, and what it shows is that, yes, the labor market is cooling, but hiring is still strong. If you looked at that 107,000 jobs that we saw for the month of January in a normal economy, in a normal year, pretend there wasn't a pandemic, you'd take that number every single day. It's a solid number. But within that solid number, you see pockets of weakness. Manufacturing has been in a virtual slump all year, and we're starting to see a pullback in industries tied to white-collar jobs, hence the layoff announcements that you previewed earlier. So there is some weakness brewing. Overall, solid number.
And yet, manufacturing just had one of its best ISM figures overnight since January 2022, I think it was as well. It's still in contraction. So even in those, but it was getting closer to that 50 mark as well. So is there a sign that the manufacturing job losses are abating or actually picking up?
I think it's too soon to tell. Those numbers are a little lumpy. They may not move in a straight line. And remember, manufacturing is a cyclical industry. It's tied to interest rates. That is a sector waiting for the Fed to start cutting. We don't know when that happens, and we don't know by how much, but it's one of the sectors that would benefit from a rate cut.
Just as a follow-up on that, I spent a lot of time speaking to the UK central bank governor yesterday about monetary versus fiscal. The fiscal stimulus via the CHIPS Act and indeed IRA that has gone into manufacturing in the US, and the reshoring trend as well, the near-friending, the localization, these are all significant structural changes for the US economy as well. Are they set to, in the medium term, actually boost that manufacturing profile?
I think you can make a case that the industry is in absorption mode, and it's absorbing all of these policy changes. And the trigger for that actualization of those change, I think, is lower interest rates. So when all of these things collide, I think manufacturing's in a good stead. But it comes at a time when the service sector, like leisure and hospitality, been the stalwart of the U.S. labor market gains, is starting to slow down, as with those white-collar jobs I said earlier.
Right. We've got the anomaly around a couple of sectors, as you point out. What does that do to the overall mix of the headline unemployment level? You know, what sort of skew are we going to see because of those really hot sectors still?
Well, it's interesting because that skew has even changed in the last 3 months. What's been solid over those months is healthcare and education. There was a pause in those sectors coming out of the recovery, and it was really leisure and hospitality dominating gains. Now we're seeing a slight shift. So we'll see if healthcare can stand up. This is not a cyclical industry. It's an industry where there's a lot of demand, especially with an aging population. And it's going to be curious to see if those gains stay the course through 2024.
For a long time, economists have looked at the tipping point between unemployment and inflation. Last year, everyone was tossing out the Phillips curve. As we look through 2024, more normal conditions, we get much further past those post-pandemic trends. Do things like the Nauru and Phillips curve come back?
I think you can't count it out. Wages are really, in my mind, the bridge between the labor market and inflation, and we've seen wages moderate quite a bit over the last year. We track wages very sharply at ADP because we pay people. And so that moderation, I think, has basically faded any threat of a wage price spiral. It doesn't exist in the data, and that gives the Fed some latitude to do what it wants when it comes to interest rates without worrying about wages triggering inflation again.
So what do you say to investors saying, well, it's unusual to be setting monetary policy using some of the labour market data because it's such a lagging indicator? Do you feel as though it is a bit rearview mirror even at this point as we're trying to set policy for the future?
I think you have to. It has to be a player in your decisions. Right now, it's a really great sweet spot for the Fed. They have low unemployment and moderating wage growth. There's no threat of a recession anytime soon. So they have a lot of power in their decision making, but I'm sure they're looking at all kinds of data, consumer data, retail data, productivity data to make this decision. You could get kind of lost in all these data points. So getting a clear course to a rate cut is going to be really important for them.
It feels as though there are points in time where things can change. The narrative that we knew before can be different in future. And this time round, I was looking at some of the announcements from, I think it was one of the big logistics companies this week, and saying, look, we're cutting jobs and those jobs are not coming back. We're going to be using AI, we're going to change the way we operate. Are we at an important junction when it comes to the labour market? Because we do have this AI story. We don't know how those use cases are going to play out, and we don't know how workers are going to interact with the technology. Does the Fed need to be very careful at this point that it doesn't create economic scarring, encouraging companies to really accelerate towards the technology at the expense of workers having positions in future?
Yeah, I think the Fed is it's curious, your question, because AI is a game changer in so many ways. And the Fed is going to have to start thinking both short-term and long-term. Remember, the Fed's actions are short-term. They're cyclical. They're right now. They're the next 6 months. But AI and tech innovations are medium to long-term. And we really don't know. The world doesn't know how they're going to play out in the labor market. My sense is that it's going to create jobs in some sectors and maybe augment or lower jobs in other sectors and maybe reduce jobs in other sectors. So we're looking at the warehousing. We don't know if that's a structural change or a cyclical change, and time will tell. But I think of it as a change in the U.S. economy from digital-based to people being more in the service industry after the pandemic, wanting those services.
Neil, I've been taking a sneak preview, a look at your profile on your website, because I wanted to check something, and actually one of your areas.
It's dangerous. This early in the morning. Okay.
The photo's a lot more flattering than my one on the website, I tell you. I look like her granddad. But one of the things you're a specialist at is women in the workforce as well. And I'm interested in workforce participation more generally as well. I kind of struggle sometimes to understand why the US participation rate is still stuck in the very low 60s. I think women in the workforce is even lower as well. Why do we have, and maybe there's two questions in one, why are the participation rates stuck in the low 60s? And again, I guess as a supplementary question, why is the women's workforce participation still that much lower?
You know, that's a global issue. We've seen a world's labor force participation going down since the 1990s. Part of this is an aging demographic story. If you look at the prime age workforce in the United States, 25 to 55, it's actually recovered back to 2019. Women's labor force participation for prime age women actually hit a record over the summer. I credit Beyonce and Taylor Swift. Obviously, they're driving the U.S. economy, at least during that period, the last 6 months.
Because they created inflation all around the world.
Exactly.
I mean, the Swedish inflation went through the roof when Swiftie was in town.
They were really important drivers. Women had a great 6-month season, but when you look at the ADP data, you see a really curious thing going on. More women are working, but more women are working part-time. And if you look at hours worked per week, it's lower now than it was before the pandemic. So those gains are vulnerable. Just because more women are working, it doesn't mean they're working more, and I think that's something to watch. The reasons could be a multitude of reasons, from family and home to just the sectors that they're in being more vulnerable to job loss and job cuts. It's something to watch, something we'll be researching.
I've got to say, I'm hearing more and more about job sharing though, and senior positions where you would not have seen that in the past. Two women perhaps wanting to share a job over the course of a week. Surely that trend's positive because the flexibility is now working for women.
Yes, if the choice in work arrangements, and we've seen more work arrangements possibilities, and that's really great for women who can work remotely. But most women, and this is the thing, are over-concentrated in jobs that require you to be on site. Nurses, teachers, childcare workers, and those arrangements may not be available. So yes, for women in some industries, banking, technology, information, that is a nice new part of their amenities at work, but not all women can have that.
Do we want to go there on the Oscars then? Because Margot Robbie, who you just referenced, she didn't get a Best Oscar nomination.
No, for
Okay,
Barbie.
she was very good.
It was good.
I mean, she has my nomination being an economist for what it's worth. She not only did a great acting job, she created a lot of wealth in the process.
Yeah.
So I think that's a
I don't know. I loved it. I loved the movie. I don't know if it was Best Oscar. I tell you what I did see, which I don't know if you guys have you seen Naiad? And it's really, really brilliant movie. But Annette Bening's been nominated,
Wow.
and I think that was brilliant.
Well, you know what I'm watching, and it's not that.
Oh, God. You don't want to know what she's watching. Carey Mulligan, Emma Huller, Sandra Huller, Emma Stone, and Lily Gladstone are the other nominees as well. We always love seeing you, Neela. Thank you very much indeed for your time today. A lot of fun as well. Neela Richardson.